Hey friends, welcome back to another video. Today's gonna be my July reading wrap-up. I read 14, I DNF 3. I tried to somewhat organize these by genre or theme. Let's get into the books. My biggest genre or trend of the month were mystery thrillers. Surprisingly, I guess I was in the mood, but unfortunately for me, none of these are above a 3-star, which is a bummer. I'm gonna start with the one that I DNF'd, The Island by Adrienne McKenty. This was on my summer TBR. This author also wrote The Chain. I don't read thrillers too often, but I do like the idea of survival thrillers over psychological domestic ones. No Exit by Taylor Adams and TJ Newman books have all worked really well for me, and they are all very fast-paced survival thrillers. I thought that I had a good chance with this one because that's what this promised to be. A high-stakes thriller on an island about a family. Maybe people are out to get them, who knows. I got a few chapters in, and when we encountered the first death scene, which happened very fast actually, it was way too overly descriptive and gory for me, and usually that doesn't bother me too much. Like violence and gore, I feel like I could handle more than like supernatural stuff or sex or drugs or stuff like that. But for whatever reason, maybe it's because I was pregnant or whatever the timing was, it just made me so gross that I had to stop reading this, and I was like, nope, not gonna do it. I also didn't care for the characters. I think with survivor thrillers that I have read and enjoyed, I was so rooting for the main character to survive, and right after that, this main character, I wasn't really caring about her. She's newly married to a widower with 2 teenage kids. The kids hate her, and she's much younger than him, and he's like some business executive living in Australia, and they go on this family vacation, and she's much younger and kind of like naive, and she was a bit like, yeah, most people in my life don't understand why I married this guy, but I love him. So all of that, unlikable main character that I didn't really care to root for. Too much gore and violence, and I saw the predictable events unfolding. I was like, no, I'm gonna put this book down. It's not for me. Next, I had a strong urge to DNF or put down and not finish, but it kind of grew on me, and then it didn't work in the end, and I was like, oh, I kind of wish I did stop reading this. I'm talking about No Life for a Lady by Hannah Dolby. This is a historical mystery. The premise of this book is that there's a 28-year-old girl named Violet whose mother disappeared when she was 18, and she never found out why, and her dad was a bit hush-hush about it, like, let's just move on with her life, we'll never talk about this. So she decides to hire a detective. It's been 10 years, she wants to find out what happened to her mom. Did she die? Did she run away? Well, the detective she hires is a bit weird and acting strange and uncovering information, and he's not really treating her right, so she decides to find another detective in town and befriends him, starts working for him, learning how to type. They develop a friendship, eventually a romance, which kind of wasn't developed, but honestly the romance was the only thing that was holding me through the book. This book is set in the late 1800s in England, and she's your typical unconventional girl for that time. She doesn't want to marry, she's not following societal expectations or her father's expectations on her, and she wants to become a lady detective. I don't know if this book is going to become a series, but it didn't work for me, and I can't really pinpoint exactly why. There was quite a bit of, I don't know if crudeness is the right word, in the book for that time period. It kind of took me out of the story. There's a lot of language of her trying to figure out like what sex is, because she just doesn't understand, and like how a man looks in the private area, and that was kind of like a theme throughout the whole book. Not overly gratuitous or descriptive, but it just kind of put a weird icky feeling in the book for me that was weird. So yeah, I didn't love it. I feel like this could work for some people, but not so much for me. Then we have 2 3-star cozy-ish mysteries. The first one I'll talk about is The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell. This is getting a lot of love and praise this year, and this is definitely for fans of the Great British Baking Show, which I am. I do love that show, and this has so many nods to that show and experience, but this is set in the US as if the show was filmed here, and it has multiple perspectives from the show's contestants to the showrunners and the hosts and the producers of the show. You get multiple points of view in the story. You start off with someone died, and then you go back to the start of the show filming, and you get to learn about all these different characters, and then things unfolded from there. The biggest bummer for me was that I was completely not shocked. I saw the ending coming a mile away. Like, it was so predictable and obvious that I was like, there's absolutely no twists in this book, but it was entertaining. The other cozy mystery that I read is Shady Hollow by Juno Black. This is also very hyped and loved here on BookTube. It lived up to my expectations. I liked it overall, but it didn't blow me away. And this is not a new favorite series, and I don't think I'll continue. I think it's a 4-book series now. It very much is a group of animals that live in like a woodland town together, and then one of them gets murdered, and the main character is a fox. She's a reporter, and she's uncovering clues and talking to different townsfolk, and then in the end you figured out who did it. It was very sweet and cozy and simple, again entertaining, but didn't like do anything extra special for me. Next, let's jump into fantasy. I'm dabbling in the genre, no favorites yet to report, but I'll start with Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, a very beloved author and book Also 2023 release. This is part of his like secret projects thing. This is my first book by this author, and for the reviews that I've seen of this book are almost all from people who have read Sanderson before, and so I feel like their love for this book, this like 5-star experience for them, makes more sense than for me who has no background with this author or the fantasy world really in general. Also, I realized during reading this book, I've only watched The Princess Bride, the movie, and it's fine. It's definitely not my kind of movie. Like I understand why it's like a cult favorite for so many, but it's just not my kind of humor, and I just find it, you know, silly and ridiculous. And this is very much in the lines of Princess Bride. It is over the top, silly and ridiculous and clever and funny and entertaining, and I liked my time overall. But I did get bogged down with understanding this fantasy world and the spores and the sea. A lot of that was described of how things worked, and for me just felt a bit much. Kind of took me out of the story to try to imagine it in my mind's eye, which I had a hard time doing. And maybe that's just, again, my not familiarity with the fantasy world experience, or my brain just thinking in that way during reading. So I liked it, didn't love it. It didn't turn me off of fantasy. I'm still willing to maybe try Sanderson in the future, but I'm still on the hunt for a standalone fantasy novel that will just sweep me away. Tick all the boxes. Please let me know if you have any recommendations. Another fantasy I picked up is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This was a recommendation when I asked for some Regency romance, and this is very much a historical fantasy Regency romance book. It is a young adult, and I also overall found it enjoyable, but didn't love it. I mean, that is literally my reading year. Everything is 3 stars. In this story, we have a young girl that encounters like some evil sorcerer spirit, and he takes half of her soul, which then leaves her like emotionless. She kind of has like a straight face and is very blunt and like can't read people's emotions, and so she goes on living that way. Her best friend is her cousin. They go into town to join the London scene and maybe find husbands. She ends up falling in love with another sorcerer wizard, and there's like magical discovery involved between the two. I think this is the kind of fantasy where there's like a real world and a magical world, and the two kind of coincide a little bit, so you're sort of figuring the magical stuff out while still understanding the reality of this Regency time period. So yeah, liked it, didn't love it, still on the hunt for a Regency romance that I really enjoyed, like I did Sophie Irwin's book a few months back. Since we just talked about romance, let me mention another 3-star read for me. When in Rome by Sarah Adams. She is a clean romance author, and from reading this book, I would say, yeah, it's pretty clean. There's like no explicit sex scenes or anything like that. But just like every romance I read, this falls in the middle. I liked it overall. Some things bothered me. Actually, a bit of stuff bothered me, and I rolled my eyes a lot. The writing just wasn't great. The couple was fun and fine, but I just got annoyed with how the author described them. Every single scene, every single page, every single interaction, she had to describe their physicality and like how attracted they were to each other. Like, oh my gosh, his green eyes. Like every possible way you think you can describe green eyes. Just a enormous amount of description around this person's physicality and how small and gorgeous and hot she is and how big and strong, his blonde hair and green eyes. It just was everywhere, all over the page, all the time, and I was so annoyed. I was like, okay, I get it. I get how these two characters look. I get that they're really attracted to each other. Can we have other things happen, please? That was mostly my annoyance with the book, but overall a fun, fluffy, cute little romance escape. We have a girl who's a famous singer celebrity, and she goes to this small town, Rome, Kentucky, and basically wants to get away from her famous life for 2 weeks. So she ends up falling in love with this guy and falling in love with the town and the people in the town and doing all these things that she doesn't get to do because she's so famous. Another romance that was just fine. Next up could be maybe considered a romance, but more just a contemporary story. I couldn't tell you because I didn't really get too far. That book is The Last Chance Library by Freya Sampson. This was a recommendation for just like a sweet contemporary getaway with a little bit of a romance subplot. This just goes in the bucket of these like contemporary sad person stories, but eventually they grow out of their sadness or their past trauma, and it's usually a small town vibe. This though would work for so many people. This is definitely a me problem for whatever reason with these types of stories. I don't know why I don't connect to them, but I understand why so many people love this, because it's sweet and it's wholesome and it's lovely, and it's a small little English community about this girl whose mom died 10 years ago and she's still reeling from that and all sad and introverted and doesn't have any friends, doesn't do anything, but she works at the library. But the library is getting shut down, and so the community comes together to save the library, and she gets swept up in that. A cute cover, a cute premise, totally works for some people. I just have some sort of problem, I don't know, in my heart, in my mind with these books. They just don't work for whatever reason for me. Another DNF I'm going to talk about, all of the negative energy your way. I'm sorry. I'm gonna not try to be too ranty about this one because this one is a bit of a mystery to me, but I'm talking about Sing Unburied, Sing by Jesmyn Ward. I picked this up as a buddy read with the lovely Denise from La Rosa Reads, and by far the best thing about this book was that I got to hear her ranty thoughts on it as well, and I wasn't the only one who just had a really weird time with this book. She actually got to read the whole thing, and I stopped after a certain point because I was just like, this is not gonna work for me. This is not my kind of book. But I absolutely loved hearing her thoughts, and I don't know if she has her July wrap-up up yet, but if she does, I will link it down below, or I'll link it after the fact when she posts it, because I'm so curious how she's gonna talk about it to the interwebs. All that to say, this is a weird, like, historical, mystery, magical realism, ghost story, slice of life kind of book. And I didn't get too far because, again, it just was too strange for me. I had a hard time with the writing style. It shifted perspectives. It gave me whiplash. It jumped around. I didn't know who I was learning about. What character is this? Who's speaking? It just took me way too long to figure that out, and I didn't really love the overly descriptive writing about kind of randomness that I didn't totally care about. I'm just missing something with this book. I know that this book has things to say about the Black experience and race relations and some historical context living in like this impoverished community, but I didn't really make it that far, and I'm glad I didn't, because from what I know, Denise told me, is that there's just a lot of description about throwing up in this book. And being pregnant, I was like, I don't want to read about that. I already did enough of that in my first 3 months of pregnancy. I'm glad that I DNF'd this one because I don't think that it was going to work for me in the long run. Let's pivot to some positivity perhaps. I picked up The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow, and I liked it. Guys, I liked a book. I landed on 4 stars with this one. It was a great read. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling of sorts from the perspective of Mary Bennet, who is a character in the original Pride and Prejudice story that doesn't get too much action or scene time in the book. She's this misunderstood, quiet sister who isn't like her other sisters and kind of is in the background of the story. In this book, Janice Hadlow imagines what Mary Bennet's life was like, what she thought about, how she reacted to her crazy mom and her life circumstances and her sisters doing what they did, and then ultimately her love story and how she was able to find love in the end. It was a very lovely read. It was a long one, but I really enjoyed my time with it. I was totally immersed. It felt very nostalgic, even though I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time last year. It felt like it was true to the original writing. I feel like Jane Austen would have approved of this writing and this writing style and the story. Definitely would recommend for fans of Pride and Prejudice. This was my one Jane Austen July participation this year, and I'm glad that I finally picked this book up. A picture book that I picked up is Beneath by Corey Dorfeld. This was a very sweet picture book. Basically, this young boy, kind of lost in his feelings, is throwing a little bit of a tantrum, doesn't want to deal with life, and his grandpa's like, hey, let's go on a walk. And they notice things that are going on beneath the surface, whether with nature or with other people that they interact with, and it was a very sweet story. A 5-star read, yes, I found a 5-star read, was this beautiful, lovely children's graphic novel called Cody by Jared Cullum. This was so sweet and so wonderful and just hit me in the heart. It was so cute. I loved this illustration and color palette. These lovely watercolor illustrations are also paired with a story of friendship. This very much gave me the Lightfall Girl in the Galdurian vibes. Even though that's a middle grade graphic novel fantasy story of friendship, this one definitely gave off the same like adventurous friendship feels. It is about a young girl that's also misunderstood, doesn't have too many friends. She's in Alaska for the summer with her aunt or grandma, and she befriends a bear, and then she has to go home for the summer, and the bear decides to find her because he's sad without her, and it's his adventure and story of trying to find her and then ultimately them coming together. If you are a fan of graphic novels, if you're a fan of middle grade, just need a quick, wholesome, feel-good read, pick this up. Another graphic novel that I picked up, historical, a little bit nonfiction, was Visit to Moscow by Anna Alswanger and Rabbi Raphael Grossman, illustrated by Evgenia Neiberg. I just picked this up off the shelf in my graphic novel section at the library. This was a short read. The title got to me because I'm a sucker for books that have to do with Russia, Ukraine, the Soviet Union, etc., because it's part of my culture. This one was a very short one. It's based on true events and this Jewish rabbi's experience going to the Soviet Union and trying to talk to Jews, and he was on some part of delegation there. And this was one very short, tiny little glimpse story into one person that he interacted with in one family. And overall, I gave this 3 stars. The majority of this book has very few words. I did love that it was in color because I prefer graphic novels to be in color. The color palette was lovely. The illustrations were interesting. The text could have been better, like it wasn't totally fleshed out. I didn't really get too much of the story itself. It could have been much longer. I feel like I got more from the ending, which was just like an author's note, like nonfiction of just what happened and who this person was that this story was based off of. Let's end with my nonfiction stack. I picked up How Dare the Sun Rise by Sandra Oringimana. This is Sandra's experience of being a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo and the civil war and unrest that was happening in the country. Her family ended up fleeing as refugees, staying in a refugee camp. There was this absolutely terrible massacre. Members of her family died. She then was later able to move to America with her family, and then it's her growing up and dealing with the repercussions and trauma of that past in her story. It was very sad but hopeful as well, because she tells a story and overcomes so much, and her family has overcome so much. So if you're a fan of memoirs, specifically anything that has to do with like overcoming trauma in the past, or like stories about the refugee and immigrant experience, then this is a book for you. All right, I'm gonna end with 3 parenting books because that's just where I am now. I have a month and a half left. I have 7 weeks till baby gets here and pressure's on, guys. But anyways, I picked up On Becoming Baby Wise by Gary Ezzo and Robert Buckman. This was recommended by Melissa from Libraries and Labradors. Thanks for the rec, because this is a great book on figuring out sleep. It's funny, I say great, you know, it's hypothetical now. We don't actually have a baby. So I don't know if the things that I learned in this book and the strategies and the takeaways and the notes are actually gonna work, but we'll see. I have high hopes. My husband and I are we're gonna try our best. This was incredibly like practical, helpful, very informational, which I really enjoyed. It was a great read. Then I picked up The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read and Your Children Will Be Glad That You Did by Philippa Perry. Now, I really shouldn't be reading parenting books, I think, just yet. I feel like I'm still gonna figure out this like newborn baby stage. So I'm trying to hone in on info on that, but this is very much a book on parenting in general. Overall, this book was very interesting. Lots of discussion between my husband and I and just like our friends and I and parenting philosophies. This was also, I believe, a recommendation from one of you guys. So thank you for that. I like this one. I gave it 3 stars because it was so informational, made me think. I don't know if I fully agree on like the full parenting strategy, because this book is very much focused on feelings, validating your child's feelings pretty much at all costs, and it is quite like anti-discipline, anti-morality, anti-judgment to your child, and all about like feelings and the way you talk. And I think there's a lot of good discussion around how to communicate and talk to your child, but I don't know if I fully agree with the philosophy of no discipline. Well, I know I don't agree with that. And not discipline like discipline, but you know, like even being able to say no to your child, stuff like that. It's just a lot. There's a lot in this book that like made me think. And I texted my friend who's a therapist, a family and child therapist, because this book is written by a psychotherapist from England. I texted my friend who's a therapist and I'm like, so read this book. Can you tell me what are the things that I should take away from it? What are the good stuff? And what's like maybe not the best practice? So anyways, this is an interesting one as I'm dipping into stepping my toe into this parenting journey and all of the information that I'm going to process and how me and my husband are going to try to parent our child and what things that we will try or not. This is just a good introduction to a certain kind of parenting that we could do and things that we can implement. And then lastly, I picked up Dear Future Mama by Megan Trainor, a TMI guide to pregnancy, birth, and new motherhood from your bestie. I do like celebrity memoirs now and again. I'm not the hugest fan of Megan Trainor. Like, I know a couple of her songs, but you know, not anything crazy. She married the guy that is from Spy Kids. She mentioned that a lot. But anyways, I listened to the audiobook of this one. She narrates it herself. This is her experience going through pregnancy, birth, and being a new mom. She had her baby during the COVID pandemic, so that kind of played a factor into the way she did certain things. She's also a celebrity with quite a lot of disposable income, so she did certain things that maybe people wouldn't do, and she does bring that up when it happens. And she was just very much like a no BS, here's just what happened to me or things that are going on. You also get a little bit of input from her OBGYN and her husband and different like little tidbits and stuff. I felt a little like self-helpy, but also not totally applicable to your average person. I just kind of took this as one woman's experience going through pregnancy and birth, as I've now listened to so many others from like podcasts and stuff. So yeah, I liked it, but I didn't like have that many takeaways from it. So those are all of the books that I read and DNF'd and had mostly mediocre thoughts about in the month of July. Let me know if you have any thoughts below on any of these books, reads, if you have any recommendations, I'll take them. And thank you so much for spending some time with me today and watching, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.